So if you're new here, I am TJ Van Tol. I work as a developer advocate at Progress. With me, as always, Dan Wilson. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm Dan Wilson. I work at Blues Wireless, where we get your sensor data from the edge to your cloud, and I'm doing great, TJ.
So if you are new here, this is a show that we've been doing for quite a while. Actually, Dan, do you remember when we started this? Has it been like a year? I don't know.
Seems like it's been about a year.
We've been doing this for quite a while. We don't normally do this all day, though. So what's special about today is we're going to be doing this for 6 hours. Dan has promised not to take a bathroom break, so we're going to have to hold him to that. But we have 8 awesome guests joining us today. It's going to be a lot of fun. We got a lot of React content to cover. This is a program we do every week. So if you like the format, if you like hanging out with us, talking React on Twitch, this show is React Wednesdays. You can look us up. You can add the show to the calendar. You can come hang out with us. So with that in mind, I think we're ready to just dive right in. So why don't we go ahead and bring on our first guest. We've got a senior software engineer from the Home Depot, Paige Niedringhaus. Paige, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. Welcome back to React Wednesdays. So you are a returning champion on the show.
I am. Thank you for having me back. I'm really excited to be here again.
So why don't you tell people, so Paige and I are actually also co-hosts of React Roundup, a podcast. So if you're a podcast person, you might want to check that out. But our go-to line to start that show, I'll turn it back on you, is why don't you tell people who you are, what you do, why you're famous, that sort of stuff.
Sure. So you've already done a great job of giving me a little bit of an introduction, but my name is Paige Niedringhaus. I am a senior software engineer for the Home Depot currently. And I am a big fan of React. I've been using it now for about 3 years at an enterprise level. I have been developing side projects with it for longer than that. And I just really enjoy it as a JavaScript framework. So when you told me that you were going to do this all-day Reactathon and asked if I'd like to be a part of it, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to kind of share some of the things that I've learned building large-scale apps. And I'm really excited to help other people get good at it as well.
Awesome. Well, why don't we, I know you want to talk about enterprise apps, so maybe we could start by I'll give you a segue here of what's your experience with just enterprise apps. And then if you want, if we could just start to dive right into what you wanted to talk about today as well.
Totally. So as you can imagine with Home Depot, we have a lot more than just the .com website that most consumers see when they're shopping for wrenches and hammers and power tools. We have a lot of internal applications that help us handle really large amounts of data. The one that I work on in particular helps our merchants who work for the Home Depot manage their assortments of products in our stores. So we have 2,000 stores, about 1 million products, and 150 to 200 people who are responsible for making sure we have the right products in the right stores at the right times. So it's a lot of moving data and pieces of information to keep track of, and helping to make that performant in a React application has been a large challenge that my team and I have been working on for about the last 3.5 to 4 years, and it's been a fantastic learning experience. We've definitely gotten better at it as time has gone on, and there's definitely a lot of things that I have learned that I would love to help other teams who are going through the same or similar types of processes be aware of, I guess, for when they are tackling some of the same issues that we have, because I'm sure we're not alone in any of these issues.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because I think, and Dan and I have both been there, everything's different in like a big company or an enterprise. And it's amazing how much tutorials you see, like sometimes fail to acknowledge that, like they're very much written for simple problems, right? Where you just have 1 or 2 people working on something. And man, like at scale, your problems and everything becomes so much more challenging, even for simple things.
Well, and not only do they become more challenging, we have a whole extra set of problems in that our applications don't just live for a year or 2 years. They can go on for 3 years, 5 years. Probably we have services that are even older than that are still running and critical to Home Depot's success. So not only do we have to build from with what we have at the time that we start building an application, but we also have to try and maintain and hopefully improve it as time goes by and new things come out and there's new ways to solve problems that we didn't previously have. So it's kind of a really interesting combination of adding new features to our products or our applications, but also upgrading the existing infrastructure and underlying code to try and continue to take advantages of those new features and the framework additions as they become available.
You know, given how fast the React ecosystem changes, I can imagine this is a daunting task, but you've probably developed some amazing processes to get through it all.
We've learned some of the lessons the hard way. Things
As
like
one does.
things like not putting off upgrades until long-term support pretty much disappears for whatever you're currently running on. But also, we have gotten better at it as time has gone on. So like I said, I'm excited to kind of share some of the things that we've learned, both the hard way and the newer and better ways of doing things that we have gotten used to.
Well, cool. I know you want to cover some of this stuff. So is this a good time for me to bring up your screen if you want to dive right in?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. It should be up now.
Cool. So like we've already started talking about, I'm going to be talking about how to modernize enterprise React apps. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at Paige Niedringhaus. I'm available and happy to talk about any and all of this. So without further ado, let's talk about putting off the upgrades, because this is something that I think most teams are familiar with. It's not fun. It's not necessarily the most exciting part of your job, but there's a lot of pitfalls that come if you decide that that's the route that you're going to take. So from a technical standpoint, we can all kind of understand these. Older frameworks eventually start to lose support. My team got into a bad situation like this when we were still building an Angular application. We went right up to the point where Google said, we're going to stop supporting Angular JS 1.5, and then had to scramble to figure out what our next move was. The documentation will start to erode for the problems that you're trying to solve. It just happens. I've been on Stack Overflows that are 7 years old when I'm looking to solve some of my problems, and that's never a good feeling. And once you have let some upgrades build up, it's really, really terrifying to actually take the plunge and make those upgrades, because there is so much that has happened between maybe when you started and when you're finally have decided that it's time to do that upgrade. There's a lot of stuff that could go wrong. But in addition to that, there is the people side of the issue. From a developer standpoint, legacy apps aren't usually something that developers want to work for. I know that there are some COBOL experts out there who come in and they do 2 weeks of work for a company that has a mission critical COBOL system, and then they go and they, hang out for the rest of the year. But that's not what the majority of us as developers want to do. We want to be on the cutting edge of using new technologies, solving new problems, building new frameworks and applications and things like that. So when you're trying to advertise for a job where you're going to be maintaining a legacy application, you're probably not going to have the best and the brightest wanting to be a part of that team, no matter how good that team is or how great that application might be and important to a company.
You just touched on something, Paige. I think a lot of newer developers might not fully grasp, but like in 2001, I worked for a large health insurance company, and the mantra at the time was, we're going to write all of our COBOL into Java. Never happened. In fact, the core business still runs on COBOL because A, no one understands it, and B, how are you going to rewrite all that? It's 30 years of software development. And so in an enterprise, it's almost like rubbing duct tape on the floor. You just sort of accumulate stuff. You can't really get rid of it easy. Like, have you had to bump into these challenges in your team?
Oh, absolutely. We actually have a product that is a sister application to the one that we work on now that has not been touched and nobody wants to touch in probably the past 4 to 5 years. we just cross our fingers. It's written in JavaScript MVC, which is a framework I'd never even heard of before I got there. It is a nightmare of a product, but we can't get rid of it because we haven't taken all the functionality that it has and put it into a newer application yet. So we just have to pray that it continues to run. Yeah. But we can't shut it down. That's the other thing, is our users have to have it to do their jobs. So everybody just crosses their fingers and hopes that it will continue to do what it's been doing for the past 6 to 8 years successfully, and that nothing goes wrong.
If it's the app that tells me what base and aisle something's in, please keep it going. I really need that.
It is not that application, but I completely agree with you. That app is very cool. I love the in-store features that you can do now with the Home Depot app.
Yeah, Paige, Dan, you might notice Dan's lighting situation is a lot better. He's been bragging about his lights from the Home Depot, so he's got a nice plug there.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, Paige, I've been a Home Depot loyalist for many months now. You've converted me. I'm sure the stock price has gone up appreciably.
We thank you for your service, and for everybody else who's buying from Home Depot. We've had a fantastic year in pandemic. Everybody decided it was time to upgrade their homes in all ways possible. Yeah, but like I was saying, legacy apps aren't really something that developers want to work on, and ultimately it makes development harder than it needs to be, especially when you are aware of some of the new upgrades that might be coming to a React application or React as a framework. Just knowing that you can't take advantage of them because you're working in an older version that doesn't support it is really frustrating. You can see a better solution if you had access to that newer version of React that the team just hasn't bothered to upgrade to. So it's not super fun as a developer, and it's not super fun as the person trying to maintain that.
Yeah, I don't know where your slide deck is going, but I hope there's some strategies in here to make that problem easier.
There are, absolutely. And that's what we're getting to. But the first thing you can do before you know how to upgrade is you're going to need to assess the damage that's already there, because there are some different scenarios, and depending on where you are as an application is going to determine like how you can go about these types of upgrades. So the worst case scenario that I talked really briefly about is when you have to completely shut down feature development and probably migrate to a new application, a new framework, a new something. This is when the code is just out of control. It's the sister application that I was just talking about, where nobody on the team is very familiar with the framework any longer. No one who originally built the applications is still around to kind of answer questions and tell you where not to put duct tape or where to stick that piece of bubble gum to keep it going. This is going to be the most everybody is going to be unhappy when this happens, but it does happen. So be honest with yourselves, with your product managers, with everybody who needs to know. Sometimes you just have to shut down feature development completely and do a full-scale overhaul. But that is not usually the case, and I hope it's not the situation that you find yourself in. So a middle of the road scenario is half the team has to work on new features and half the team has to work on upgrades. This is a scenario that I've been in myself. It's not the greatest situation, but it keeps your business partners happy because you keep giving new features to your clients or your users, and it also helps eliminate some of the tech debt that the team has racked up over time by not doing these upgrades in a consistent or organized manner. And then the best case scenario, which is the one that we want to all go with and the one that we're trying to get towards with this type of a slide deck, is we make small incremental changes as we go. So we use new techniques and new files as you're creating them and adding new features. We update the outdated files as we touch them and just keep kind of incrementally improving the code as we go. And we build these sorts of upgrade scenarios into our backlog so that they're regularly occurring things. And it's not just like, oh, we're completely losing support for the current React version that we're on. We better upgrade because after that, there's nothing else. So with that, let's talk about actually getting into these new features. I know it's really exciting to upgrade to a new version of something, but when it's something big like React hooks, which is a fundamental shift to how we did React development, you're probably not going to want to start with the most complicated pieces of your application and take those components and just convert them into functional components, take those classes. So I have some examples and some do's and don'ts for how you should probably approach this. So I would recommend highly watching some tutorials, coding along with them, kind of building those smaller side projects that we were talking about, the ones that are less complex, less impactful. Maybe they don't even use any of your existing application code. It's something simple, it's clean, it's a lot easier to understand probably than what you're currently working on. And one thing that I would highly recommend, if possible, is to try to learn from some people who are more expert at it than you. And this could be another developer on your team who's just been really into it. It could be somebody within your company who maybe is more like a trainer or a consultant type of role, maybe an architect, or even outside consultants. I know people who will come in and do a 2 or 3 day workshop with your whole team to kind of get them comfortable and help get people up to speed and answer those questions that you may not be able to find the answers to just by doing a quick Google search. So, take advantage of things like that. Test it in a smaller, easier to reverse the errors kind of space, and don't tackle the most complex pieces of your application first, because that's discouraging. It's not going to make you want to continue this process, but it really is something that you need to do for your app to keep it up to date, to keep it modern, to keep it improving. So just try and take it small steps to get there.
I've been laughing this whole time because earlier in my career, like I would never create like a small little side sample to try something out. I would just go right in the middle
go
and
right
do
for it.
Right.
Yeah.
And because it felt like it wasn't really working if I wasn't working on the real code. But that's probably a developer maturity thing. I certainly got past it and life got easier. But just imagine for a minute that you want to build a small side project or two to get a handle on some new functionality. Like, how do you sell that in a sprint plan?
So that would probably be something that you would try to talk to your business partners about the benefits of, in terms of proof of concepts, is what we try to describe them out at work. And it's basically, hey, I see this new library or I see this new framework, and I think that it could benefit our development team if we put some time into investigating this. That's really the best way, is if you can find the value that it will add to either your development team in terms of speed and time to delivering features to your users, or to your users themselves in terms of application performance. Those are usually the two things that our business partners want to hear about in terms of, why should I give you some time or some days to investigate this thing? But if you can clearly define some benefits that might come from this, and usually it's speed in both cases, they'll probably be able to give you a little bit of leeway and try that out.
Being able to frame things in business context is also a sign of developer maturity. Like, tech for tech's sake doesn't really go anywhere, but if you can frame it as, here's how the business is going to be better. Like, as a product manager, sure, I want more features faster. If it takes me a diversion for now, it makes my tomorrow better, I can buy into that. But just saying, hey, React hooks are cool, you should let me spend a couple of weeks playing with them, it's like,
that's never going to work.
I don't think that's in the budget.
Exactly.
Real quick, Sarah just gifted a whole crap ton of gifted subs. So thank you so much. That's really awesome. And I'll just remind people too that you're welcome to get involved in the chat as well. So if you have horror stories from your enterprise, sort of feel free to chime in and tell your horror stories as well.
Yeah, just keep in mind there's a strict 9,000 character limit per story.
Yeah, you have to be brief sometimes. So I guess the biggest takeaway that I want you to get from this slide in particular is that it's hard, especially when there's a big breaking change like hooks was. So don't feel bad if it doesn't click immediately. It's taken months of consistent work with them to really get confident and feel like, yeah, I can tackle this thing. But if you've been working with classes or if you've been working with older code, it just takes a while, like anything else. You'll get better with it as you get more practice. So another thing that I would highly recommend, and I have definitely not taken my own advice in the past, is to upgrade dependencies one at a time.
Boring.
I know. Save yourself hours of debugging and beating your head against a wall because you upgraded everything that Dependabot said needed to be upgraded all at once. I have done this. I have thrown away entire feature branches because of it and started over. It's not a good idea. So now my upgrade recipe kind of goes as follows. Upgrade one dependency, run the application, try out some functionality that may have been impacted, check for errors in the console, check for failing tests if you have automated unit tests and end-to-end tests, and then repeat the process. It's not sexy, it's not fun, it's not exciting, it's not YOLO, but
but it's sensible and probably works.
Right. It makes a lot of sense.
It's sort of the nature of the beast. If there's like one theme for your tips so far, it is sort of like be gradual and deliberate in what you're doing, and don't just like, you're not going to rewrite everything. You're not going to you don't want to throw everything away or bite off big things at a one time. Like take it slow, take it deliberate, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it's just something that you learn as you work with this stuff for a while. Like before, I would have happily upgraded everything that was out of date and then run the application and wondered why nothing was happening, why the whole thing just like exploded in the console and couldn't run. But now it makes so much more sense. Like recently, my team needed to upgrade off of Node 10 because Node 10 long-term support was going away. So we upgraded to Node 12. When we did that, our jest that was running on version 24 started breaking. So we had to upgrade that to version 26. But if we had done all of those upgrades all at the same time, we would have had no idea that Node 12 and jest 24 didn't work well together. It would have been a lot longer Googling random errors to figure that out.
Sifting through the mess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those
source code.
Oh man, and those dependency things are some of the hardest things to debug because sometimes they can break things that you would not expect them to break, and there's no clear like correlation, right? Sometimes it's just some totally unrelated message, and you're in for a fun days, weeks, depending on how lucky you are. Random
GitHub issues, random gists.
Yep.
Weird stack trace errors that make no sense. Yeah. That's exactly what will happen. So go one at a time. Just trust me. You'll thank me later. So another thing that has definitely become more of an important thing to me is to have good project tooling. So things like having your version of Node the team is running defined, having the version of NPM or Yarn that you're using to install your packages defined. Just small things like that, go back and check that you have that tooling, because you can put it into your package JSON for any React application. And then there's even some tools that you can set up like NVM or Volta to make it even easier. If you're not familiar, NVM it was kind of like the first way to easily switch versions of Node on a local machine. And it was great. You could download any one. You could pretty quickly from the command line switch from 10 to 12 to 14 to what have you. But there's a new one that I recently learned about from my team that's called Volta, which is even better. So
we had Volta show a couple months ago, and I started using it, and I'm like, this is the best.
Dude, I love it. It's so convenient.
I just dropped in the chat. We had Chuck Pierce from Volta on React Wednesday. So I just dropped the link to the recording in the chat. I mean, all the coolest people are on React Wednesday.
Every single one.
They totally are. So for anybody who's not familiar, though, Volta is a way to define whatever your Node versions are, your Yarn versions, your NPM, even more than that. And then once it's installed locally and you pull down a project that has this kind of a Volta definition in it, it will automatically switch your terminal to using that version. You don't even have to think about it as a developer, which is exactly the kind of configuration that I want, the kind that I don't even have to think about. My machine just does it for me. So highly recommended. Define that stuff, get the team all downloaded to Volta and using it, and it will save you so many of those. I don't know why it doesn't work on your machine. It works on my machine.
Yeah, right.
Or
I don't know why
it won't. Or on like a CI server or whatever, right?
Exactly.
Like those sorts of things. Yep.
Yeah. The more you can just dial those in and not have to think about it, the better. Same thing can be said for your project configurations. So things like ESLint, things like Prettier. If you're not using them, start. And if you are, revisit them, because I can almost guarantee you that whatever you are using probably is outdated. And it probably would just really benefit from another look. So Prettier is great for opinionated code formatting. I honestly don't know how I developed before it existed. It makes my code so much nicer to look at and makes me not have to think about it. And then ESLint, it's just like the best way to help make your code more resilient, more quality. If you're not using it, please start using it. You'll be amazed at some of the stuff that you were writing before and how ESLint can find ways to suggest to make it better. And I just want to call out the VS Code plugins for each of these things. If you're not already using them, please get them. They're great. Great development. Just a great experience, which I know we spend a lot of time in our IDEs. So, take advantage of what's out there.
Yeah, and I always find I love tools like this because I find that they also help prevent conflicts on teams as well. Because I always think it's easier if a computer is yelling at you than like a coworker, because you don't want to be that. You don't want to be that person that has to go and tell people oh, you forgot you're not using double quotes, or over trivial things. It's much better to have an automated thing like reject a commit or something like that. It just makes life so much easier.
Save hard stuff for the people.
Exactly. Yeah, let's bike shed about different things, but let's not die on the hill when we can let Prettier or ESLint do it for us. All right. So here are some examples of a very basic Prettier and ESLint file. This one, this Prettier one is what I use for all of my personal projects, and I'm pretty sure that this is the one that my team uses with maybe just a few extra things, but that's really all it is. It is so dead simple. It just takes care of everything else. You just tell it about your single quote or double quote preferences, tabs versus spaces width, how long you want a line to be on an IDE before it wraps, and you're good to go.
So many fights avoided.
Exactly.
It's kind of sad, actually. We need more workplace drama.
I know.
Oh man, I think the only thing I take issue with is print width of 80 seems kind of short. I think I would push for bumping that up a little bit. But otherwise, I've come around on single. I never used to be a single quote person, but at some point the JavaScript world dictated that 2 spaces with single quotes was the way to go, and I've begrudgingly gotten on that train. But I don't know if I could do 80 character lines. That seems kind of short.
I have a 34-inch wide monitor. I can't imagine just using 3 inches of it, But
well,
hey,
to each his own, right?
Yep.
Set it to 800, Paige. Be a rebel.
Right. Oh man, I don't think I could do any. I mean, I will say 80 is a little bit short, but I've also seen for readability, that's kind of a recommended thing. So,
Yeah.
the team can decide that one.
Sure. It's configurable, right?
Exactly.
You get the chance to have the fights. It's just all at once.
Right. Yeah. We'll work it out, and then nobody will be able to talk about it ever again. That's the rule. And then the same for the ESLint file. You can see when you initialize a new ESLint file for a project, it will ask you, would you like our general recommendations? And then it will also ask you, are you using this inside of a React application? And if you are, it will automatically configure some of this stuff for you. Airbnb hooks, and Prettier are ones that I added because Airbnb is really the gold standard for anything React related. And then once hooks came out, they came out with an updated or additional set of rules just for hooks. So I would highly recommend that you include both of those if you're writing React applications, and also Prettier, so that Prettier and ESLint don't kind of collide, which they can have a tendency to do if you've got both of them set up to do their own sort of linting and formatting at the same time, which is how I like to run my local development environment. But yeah, it's really not too complicated. And then as you go and your team kind of gets the feel for what rules they like, what rules they don't like, what really doesn't apply to your application, you can add in your own specific overrides and rules in the bottom. But just kind of starting from a fresh place is never like a bad thing in the world of upgrades. So this one is an important one, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but React, when you're refactoring, upgrade as you go. When you're touching old files, add new features, update them, but this comes with a big old caveat. Where are you in the iteration? Are your product managers or people who are in charge of features, are they okay with it? Do you have time to do this? How many other application components are you going to have to refactor if you touch this one? How many tests are you going to break if you upgrade this? So there's a lot of just things that make it a more of an it depends type of situation, and not just a hard and fast, if you're touching an old file, let's refactor it. But when the stars align, go for it. And I have another kind of simple way that I like to do this. It is very much kind of a progressive enhancements type of thing. But if you're touching a class component, make it into a function and remove the render method, because that doesn't exist when it's not classes. Anything that is using this.state, turn it into use state hooks. Anything that's using lifecycle methods, replace it with use effect hooks. Fix any other functions that exist in that application, and then update any JSX that might have broken because of it. That's really all it comes down to.
It's a good approach because you don't end up messing with files that are dormant.
Yeah, I think the last line that you have on there is super important, because I think developers, we have a tendency that something new comes out and like, I need all of my code to be using this immediately, right? Or I can't mentally deal with there being two different like syntaxes for this feature in my application. So I need to change all of them. And you almost have to fight that tendency, because like, it is amazing. And I think you just learned this from doing this a while, but like how like subtle changes you make every change you make has some potential of screwing something up. And like, if you're not going to be messing with that file anyways, if it's not going to get tested, like that sort of thing, like you kind of have to restrain yourself. So I think this approach, I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I mean, the biggest thing that I've learned over time, like you said, is don't optimize until you need to. We're like, oh my gosh, that for loop is looping through 1,000 items in this list. It's going to be so not performant. That's exactly what the JavaScript engine is built for. Until you see it lagging in the browser, just leave it alone. It'll be fine. The engine is so much smarter than any of us could ever be. Just let it do its thing.
Yeah, there's tons of like hotspot optimization techniques that happen under the covers where they'll unroll loops and do all sort of things. And like, let the computer be the computer. You're right. Premature optimization is like one of the roots of all evil in software development.
Yeah, and when you have Dan Abramoff and Kent C. Dodds saying, don't optimize until you need to, listen to them. They're the people who know.
Kind of like Surly had a point in chat too, like as one idea, you can keep separate commits, so you can refactor as one commit and then your logic changes another. And also, if Paige Kent is here and says hi as well. So he's here. So if he's backing up your statements, you're good to go.
Exactly. Yeah. Listen to the experts. All right. So moving on. I've got a couple of little refactoring examples that I can show you. So this is an application that I built. It was just like kind of like a fun, smaller example application. but this is something that you might see. So the component that we're actually talking about is this main screen right here. You have 3 buttons to do different things with new products. And then you have a nav bar across the top that shows you how many products are already in your checkout if you've added some. So this started out life as a class-based function. You can see that it extends component, it goes through, and I've cut out some of the code for easier readability. But basically, this is the first part of how I would approach refactoring this component. You know, you can, if you're using React 17, you can completely eliminate your import statement for now. That you don't need importing React from React anymore, which is great. So I turned this into an arrow function because I'm all about arrow functions. But if you just want to do a straight up function app, that's totally fine too. But you can remove the render method and, you know, eliminate one set of curly braces, and you're on your way to updating this application. So that's kind of like where I like to start. And then I just kind of methodically go down through the application to fix everything else that needs to be updated. So the next thing that I would tackle is the state and lifecycle methods and turning those into React hooks. So we can see that up at the top of the component, we've got a little bit of state for a checkout count, which is how we see how many items are in the checkout. We've got a loading state, an error state, and a couple of other things. A component did mount that actually fetches that checkout count. So now when we look at the new example, we replace our constructor state with a use state. We have just checkout count as one, and then a cart updated Boolean as another, which I'll get into in a little bit. And instead of having component did mount, we have one single use effect, which does pretty much the same thing. It fetches the checkout count items. And cart updated is something that we'll see more with the update checkout count function below it. But just kind of keep that in mind, that this is one of the things in the dependency array that will tell fetch checkout items to run again. Basically, it exists because there are a couple of other child components that will say, hey, I've added something to the checkout, or I have removed something from it, and we want that value to update. So this is how it will be aware that those things have happened and that it needs to rerun and get that new fresh checkout value. So like I was saying before, the functions and the JSX are the things that would then be taken care of next. So in the old application, because we're using lifecycle methods, we have to basically have the same functionality in the component did mount and the second update checkout count function, because component did mount will only run on mount. It won't ever run again. So that is a great example of duplicate code that React hooks did away with. Now we can have just the single use effect that will run, and we just tell it, hey, these are the values that you need to keep track of. And once anything in that dependency array changes, run again. So now we can simplify the update checkout count function to just flip the Boolean and say, hey, to the use effect, this Boolean has changed, go refetch the checkout count, which is awesome. That's like one of the biggest things that React hooks has done, is made our components a lot drier and a lot more reusable and a lot less duplicated code.
Yeah, it looks a lot cleaner.
It does, and it was a big change, but I'm such a fan of it now. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to be able to do, is like, okay, here's my list of stuff that I know I need to do in order to get this application working again. And that's really all there is to it. Just kind of repeat the cycle as you go, and you'll be in a much better place. So how do we keep this momentum going? We build those sort of maintenance activities into your backlog. If you see a new version of React come out, or you see a new version of Redux come out, or you see a new React testing library version come out, just throw a chore into your backlog, or get your product manager or whoever is in charge of it to do that, and just give them a reason to give them the value add that this will provide, better stability for our application, faster loading time for our users, faster development time for the team. As long as you can tie a value to it, they should be fine building in those maintenance activities that really will help you and the team and the application in the long run.
Got to change oil in your car, because if you don't for a couple of years, you're buying a new car.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you want to throw the whole thing away, or do you want to take a little extra time to maintain it and make it run as it should? So like we talked about before, proof of concepts. If you can show the value that you're bringing with a proof of concept, everybody on the team will probably be more receptive to it. And developers like me like to poke around. So if you have a working example that I can fiddle with, I'm going to be much happier and more likely to take your recommendation and want to try and incorporate it into the application. And then just kind of the biggest takeaways from this whole talk I hope that you get are to make this kind of thing an ongoing activity. It's not just a one and done. It's not just a once every 6 months or once a year. It should just be a regularly occurring thing. As you revisit older code, refactor it. If you're not touching it, just leave it alone. It's fine. It was working. Let it continue working. And just try to leave your code better than you found it. That's really all it is think of yourself 6 months down the road, or think of any other developer on your team and try and make the code better for them so that they can do what they need to do.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
This has been really, go ahead.
I know, I'm almost done. I promise.
I was actually going to lead you into this. I was going to talk about plugs and such. So
as usual,
this works out really well. Yeah, you're on it.
So one of the things that I'm actually in the process of is writing a course for just this sort of thing, modernizing React apps, because I know from my own experience that there isn't really a lot of information out there. Most of it is start from a fresh, create React app, and then just build with all the new functions and features, which is great. It's awesome. It's a good way to get started, but it's not a lot of the experience that developers have on larger teams. So it's going to be launching on newline.co. If you want to visit their site, they have a lot of really great information, other courses out, and we're going to go through all of this kind of stuff, but in much more depth. We'll talk about project tooling. We'll talk about classes to components. We'll talk about creating custom hooks, using the context API, unit testing, end-to-end testing, component libraries. There is a lot of material that we're going to go through, and it's going to be great. And
thankfully you've chosen to do this because, like you said, there's just not a lot of sensible material out there.
Yeah, it was an interesting ask when it first came up, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I did have a lot of knowledge that I would really like to share with other people about how to kind of approach this. So here is a quick screenshot of one of the first introductory lessons, but this is the kind of thing that you'll get. And there will be videos, there will be code samples, there will be full working repositories of code that you can download and follow along with. So I think it'll be really good once it's done. And I hope that people might be interested. July 19th is when it should launch. So put that on your calendars.
You heard it here first, folks. Thanks for doing that, Paige.
Absolutely. Really happy to. I really, really hope that it's useful to a lot of people.
Awesome. And we did have one question in the chat. If people want to get the code from the slides that you showed today, do you have that up, or the slides up somewhere that people can grab them?
I will be able to put the slides up. I'll follow up with you guys about where we can share that. It's not currently available for everybody. And actually, some of that code that I just showed will be included in this course. So if you are interested in really getting hands-on, you'll be able to see this and a whole lot more examples in my course.
Well, Paige, this was awesome. Thanks so much for coming and joining us. I definitely enjoyed this. Some really good tips.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again. It's been really fun.
All right.
Have a good one.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it.